The glass door of Maplewood Community Bank swung open with a soft metallic chime that echoed through the quiet room. Inside, the bank was calm and orderly. Sunlight filtered through tall windows and reflected off polished counters. A few customers waited in line while tellers counted stacks of bills behind their stations. It was the kind of small-town bank where everyone usually knew each other's names. But that morning, one man walking through the door caught everyone's attention. Marcus Johnson stepped inside slowly, removing his worn brown hat as he looked around the room. His clothes were simple and dusty, the kind of clothes someone wears after spending long days working outside. His boots were scuffed with dried dirt, and the sleeves of his plaid shirt were rolled up from the heat of the morning sun. Marcus had driven nearly 2 hours from his farm to reach the town. In his hand he carried a small envelope. He walked toward the counter calmly. A few people in line glanced at him and then quickly looked away. Marcus waited patiently until a teller waved him forward. The teller's name tag read Amanda. She forced a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Marcus slid the envelope across the counter. "I'd like to deposit this." Amanda opened the envelope and pulled out a folded check. Her eyes moved across the number. Then she froze. Her polite smile slowly disappeared. She looked up at Marcus again, then back down at the check. The amount written on the paper made her heart skip. $30 million. Amanda blinked twice to make sure she had read it correctly. Her eyes widened. She lowered her voice. "Sir, where did you get this?" Marcus remained calm. "It's from a land sale." Amanda hesitated. "This check is very large." Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes." Amanda looked toward the office behind the glass wall where the bank manager sat working. "I'm going to need my manager to verify this," she said. Marcus shrugged gently. "That's fine." Amanda picked up the check carefully and walked quickly to the office. Inside, the manager looked up from his desk. His name was Daniel Harper, and he had been running Maplewood Community Bank for nearly 15 years. Amanda handed him the check. Daniel glanced down. At first he didn't react. Then he saw the amount. His eyebrows shot upward. 30 million. Amanda nodded. "The man at the counter says he wants to deposit it." Daniel stood up and looked through the glass, toward Marcus. Marcus stood quietly at the counter, hands folded calmly. Daniel frowned slightly. "That's him?" "Yes." Daniel picked up the check again and studied the name printed at the top. The issuing company was a massive tech corporation based in California, one of the largest companies in the country. Daniel walked out of the office slowly. He approached Marcus and gave him a thin smile. "Good morning," Daniel said. Marcus nodded politely. "Morning." Daniel held up the check. "You're attempting to deposit this?" Marcus nodded again. "Yes." Daniel looked Marcus up and down. Dusty boots, faded shirt, calloused hands. He spoke slowly. "Mr. Johnson, correct?" "Yes." Daniel crossed his arms. "This is an unusually large transaction for someone in this town." Marcus remained calm. "It's payment for my land." Daniel tilted his head. "Your land." Marcus nodded. Daniel gave a short laugh. "You expect me to believe a tech company paid $30 million for farmland?" Marcus replied quietly. "They needed the property." Daniel shook his head. "This looks suspicious." The people waiting in line began watching more closely now. Marcus leaned slightly on the counter. "It's not suspicious." Daniel's voice hardened. "Sir, people don't just walk into this bank with checks like this." Marcus stayed calm. "Well, I just did." A few customers whispered to each other. Daniel looked irritated now. "I think you should explain exactly where you got this." Marcus pointed toward the company name printed on the check. "They're building a massive data center." Daniel frowned. "Data center?" Marcus nodded. "They needed several hundred acres of land." Daniel still looked doubtful. "And you owned that land?" "Yes." Daniel scoffed quietly. "Farmers don't make $30 million. Marcus smiled faintly. "Sometimes they do." Daniel turned toward Amanda. "Call corporate verification," he said. Amanda nodded nervously and began dialing. Marcus stood silently while the room buzzed with whispers. Several minutes passed. Then Amanda's phone call connected. She spoke briefly with someone on the other end. Her expression changed slowly as she listened. Her eyes widened again. "Yes," she said into the phone. "I understand." She hung up slowly and looked toward Daniel. "They confirmed it." Daniel frowned. "Confirmed what?" Amanda swallowed. "The check is legitimate." The bank suddenly became very quiet. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "What?" Amanda spoke clearly. "The tech company purchased 600 acres from Mr. Johnson for their new data center project." Daniel stared at Marcus. "You sold 600 acres?" Marcus nodded. "My family has owned that land for generations." Daniel's earlier confidence evaporated quickly. "But why would a tech company want farmland in the middle of nowhere?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Location." He tapped the counter gently. The area has access to 3 major fiber optic lines and a stable power grid. Daniel blinked again. Marcus continued. It's perfect for a massive data center. A man waiting in line whispered loudly. $30 million. Daniel suddenly looked uncomfortable. Well, that certainly changes things. Marcus remained calm. Daniel cleared his throat. We'll be happy to process your deposit. Marcus nodded. Thank you. But before Daniel could take the check, the bank doors opened again. A black SUV pulled up outside. 2 sharply dressed men stepped inside. They looked around briefly before walking directly toward Marcus. One of them smiled warmly. Mr. Johnson? Marcus turned. Good to see you again. Daniel looked confused. Who are these gentlemen? One of the men extended his hand. My name's Robert Klein. I represent Horizon Data Systems. Daniel's eyes widened. The same company printed on the check. Robert continued. We are here to finalize the property transfer documents. He gestured respectfully toward Marcus's. Mr. Johnson here made our entire project possible. The room fell silent again. Daniel's face slowly turned pale. You mean, he actually sold you the land? Robert nodded. 600 acres. Daniel looked embarrassed now. Marcus simply stood, calmly. Robert added with a smile, without our land, our company couldn't build one of the largest data centers in the Midwest. Several customers stared at Marcus with amazement. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, Mr. Johnson, it seems we underestimated you. Marcus looked at him calmly. Yes, Daniel forced a nervous laugh. I apologize for the misunderstanding. Marcus picked up the check again. You didn't misunderstand the check? Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? Marcus spoke quietly but clearly. You misunderstood me. The words hung in the air. Robert glanced at Marcus with a small smile. Daniel sighed deeply. You're right. Marcus slid the check back across the counter. Now can we deposit it? Amanda nodded quickly. Yes, sir. She processed the deposit carefully while the rest of the bank watched. When the receipt printed, she handed it to Marcus with both hands. Congratulations, she said. Marcus thanked her politely. Robert turned toward Daniel. Our company will likely open several corporate accounts here soon. Daniel nodded eagerly. That would be wonderful. Marcus smiled slightly. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at the bank. Everyone inside was watching him now. The same man who walked in looking like an ordinary farmer. Now the wealthiest customer the bank had ever seen. Marcus tipped his hat politely. Then he stepped outside into the warm morning sun. Behind him, whispers filled the room. Because that morning the small-town bank had learned something unforgettable. Sometimes the quiet farmer walking through the door is the man holding $30 million in his hand. Marcus Johnson stepped out of Maplewood Community Bank and paused on the sidewalk for a moment. The warm breeze moved gently across the quiet street while the morning sun reflected off the glass windows of the small-town buildings. Cars rolled slowly past, and a few people walking by looked at him with curiosity. Just minutes earlier, most of those same people would have assumed he was just another farmer passing through town. Now, the story of the $30 million check was already spreading. Marcus placed the deposit receipt carefully inside his wallet and adjusted his worn hat. Across the street, Robert Klein and the other Horizon Data Systems executive walked out of the bank behind him. Robert smiled. Well, that was interesting. Marcus chuckled softly. Small towns aren't used to checks like that. Robert nodded. Or landowners like you. Marcus leaned against the hood of his old pickup truck. For most of my life, people thought that land wasn't worth much, he said. Robert looked down the road toward the open countryside beyond the town. Turns out it was worth exactly what we needed. Marcus nodded. Location is everything. The two men stood quietly for a moment. Then Robert spoke again. Our engineers are already preparing the construction site. Within a year, that farm will become one of the largest data centers in the region. Marcus looked thoughtful. My grandfather would have found that hard to imagine. Robert smiled. Your grandfather owned the land first. Marcus nodded. My family's farm has been there since the 1940s. Robert let out a low whistle. That's a long time. Marcus looked toward the horizon where the farmland stretched for miles. My grandfather used to say land was the only thing you should never rush to sell. Robert laughed slightly. Well, today you proved him right. Marcus smiled. Yeah. Across the street, inside the bank, Daniel Harper stood behind the counter, staring out the window at Marcus's truck. Amanda walked up beside him. That was something, she said. Daniel sighed. I judged him the second he walked in. Amanda nodded slowly. Most people probably did. Daniel shook his head. And he handled it better than I would have. Amanda looked down at the deposit record on the computer screen. $30 million. Daniel leaned back in his chair. That's the largest deposit this bank has ever seen. Amanda smiled slightly, and it came from a farmer. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Not just a farmer. He looked at the note Marcus had left earlier. Respect is not about recognizing powerful people. It's about treating every person with dignity before you know who they are. Daniel folded the note carefully and placed it inside his desk drawer. Today was a lesson, he said quietly. Outside, Marcus climbed into his pickup truck while Robert stood beside the open door. So what's next for you? Robert asked. Marcus started the engine but didn't pull away yet. Well, he said, after paying taxes and setting money aside for my family. Robert waited. Marcus smiled slightly. I'm buying more land. Robert laughed. You've just sold 600 acres. Marcus nodded. True. But there's a lot of farmland around here that struggling farmers might lose soon. Robert raised an eyebrow. You're planning to buy it? Marcus nodded again. And lease it back to them. Robert looked impressed. That's a pretty generous plan. Marcus shrugged. My family worked that land for 80 years. He looked toward the distant fields again. I'd rather see farmers keep farming. Robert nodded with respect. You're going to change this whole area. Marcus smiled. Maybe just help it survive. Across the street, a few people gathered near the bank windows, still whispering about the unbelievable deposit. One elderly man shook his head in amazement. $30 million. Another person added quietly. And he drove here in that old truck. Marcus noticed them watching, but didn't seem bothered. He turned back to Robert. Thanks for coming out today. Robert extended his hand. Thank you for selling us the land. They shook hands firmly. Construction begins next month, Robert said. Marcus nodded. I'll stop by the site. Robert smiled. You'll always be welcome. Marcus closed the truck door and slowly drove away from the curb. The road out of town led past fields, barns, and long fences stretching across the countryside. The same land that had once been seen as ordinary farmland was now about to power thousands of computers and store massive amounts of digital data. As Marcus drove, he thought about the moment inside the bank, the disbelief, the judgment, the sudden change in people's attitudes once they saw the number on the check. He smiled to himself. Money changed how people saw things, but character didn't. An hour later, Marcus pulled into the long dirt driveway leading to his farmhouse. The wooden porch creaked slightly as he stepped out of the truck. His mother sat in a rocking chair watching the open fields. She looked up as he approached. How did the bank trip go? She asked. Marcus handed her the deposit receipt. She adjusted her glasses and read the number. Then she looked at him quietly. Well, she said with a small smile, I guess your grandfather was right about that land. Marcus laughed. Yeah. He looked out across the acres of farmland stretching into the distance. Wind moved gently through the tall grass. For generations, his family had worked that soil with their hands. Now that same land had changed his life forever. But Marcus knew something important. Money didn't make a man valuable. Respect did. And somewhere back in the small bank in town, people were still talking about the farmer who walked in wearing dusty boots and walked out after depositing $30 million.